Hey guys, welcome back to Moe's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside Pacific Tide, the United States versus Japan, 1941 to 1945, second edition. This is a game designed by Gregory M. Smith and published by Compass Games. A few years ago, Compass published Pacific Tide first edition, and now they've got the second edition, which is going to include all known errata, as well as now a mounted map board. So if you're not a fan of paper maps, you're going to love having a mounted map here in the second edition. So let's take a look at the back of the box and see what this game's all about. Pacific Tide, the United States versus Japan, 1941 to 1945, is a compact, strategic level game covering the struggle between the United States, including some Commonwealth forces, and Japan in World War II by game designer Gregory M. Smith. This game utilizes a unique and fast-paced card-driven combat/build system revolving around carrier operations, which will provide players with a multitude of decisions. Pacific Tide is a strategic-level game featuring operational and even tactical nuances, as players must decide when and how to commit their carrier forces, land-based air, and even their intelligence assets. To a degree, the Japanese player is racing against the clock. The quality of his pilots degrades over time, and starting in 1943, he also loses the strategic initiative to undertake initial actions. The US player is also fighting the clock and cannot sit back and take a relaxed approach in defeating Japan. If he doesn't win by 1945, he doesn't win at all. Tension builds as both sides race towards decisive carrier battles and the seizure of key geographical objectives. Pacific Tide features a card-based combat/build system that is a departure from the customary event/operations point-driven system. Separate card decks are provided for the US and Japanese. Each year, the players receive that year's cards for free, but build points are expended to repurchase older cards. This prompts tension-filled dilemmas, as one cannot rebuy every card. Players must then decide which aspects of cards to use. Many have multiple but exclusive uses, such as do A or do B, and each can drive a very different result. To help ensure a tense and dynamic game, the system forces players to make many choices and decisions throughout play, whether playing against an opponent or using the personality-driven solitaire bot system. At the top you can see an example of the map, the cards, and the counters. For components we get one 17 by 22 inch mounted map, one counter sheet, 51 playing cards, 2 player aid cards, a rulebook, and 16 six-sided dice. It is rated as 3 out of 10 on a complexity. Time scale single-year turns with alternating multiple card plays. Map scale is an area map. Unit scale, individual carriers or carrier groups, fleets, army-level infantry, and air groups. Number of players is 1 to 2. Suitability for solitaire is 8 out of 10 because you have a solitaire bot system. And the average playing time is 2 to 4 hours, recommended for ages 14 and up. So let's take a look inside and see what we get. All right, we get a bag of baggies, our cards, whole big bag of dice, sealed for freshness, rulebook, player aid cards, the counter sheet, and our mounted map. So let's set up the map and take a closer look at the game. And here's a look at the mounted map that comes with the game. It's a 17 by 22 inch map, same as in the first edition, but now mounted. And this is a perfect map size, I think, to get mounted because it's not too big, not too small, and it fits really well on pretty much everybody's table, I would expect. Just like we saw in the first edition, this is a point-to-point map. You have your map legend down in the bottom right to explain to you all the different areas. Above that, you have the area for the card deck. The top right, we have the attack matrix, which gives you the number of dice you'll be using in combat. At the very top, you have the current Japanese build point track, and then you have the solitaire personality box where you'll be placing the counter that tells you which bot personality you're playing against, whether it's aggressive, balanced, or defensive. But once again, great job by Compass on this mounted map. Now we'll take a look at the player aid that comes with the game. On the front, we have the sequence of play, summary of key points, attack limitation reminder, retreat after combat, retreat before naval combat, and amphibious assault reminders, all with case number references in the rules. And at the top right, we have the attack matrix table, the same as we saw on the map. On the back, we have the Solitaire Player Aid. This gives you all of the steps for the solo AI bot during play. Next, we'll take a look at a few examples of the cards in use in the game. At the top, we have Japanese cards. At the bottom, we have the US cards. They all follow the same layout. In the center, we have the card effects. At the bottom left, we have the year the card is introduced. In the middle, we have the Solitaire Bot AI personality. And at the bottom right, we have the cost of the card if you'd like to rebuy it. Now we'll take a look at the counter sheet that comes with the game. At the top, we have the US forces. Along the bottom, we have the Japanese forces. And at the bottom right, we have the administrative counters for use in the game. I know there have been comments made about the thin counters in the first edition, and I wanted to do a little comparison. So I kind of put down the first edition counters next to the second edition counters, as well as the Imperial Tide counters. And these new counters here are kind of slightly in the middle between Imperial Tide and the first edition of Pacific Tide. They're slightly larger, but also slightly thinner, and I believe that's because they're using a different chipboard here. In the first edition, they're using a white core. Here, they're using your standard brown core, so you're going to get a slightly thicker counter. And lastly, we'll take a look at the rules. This is a 16-page full-color rulebook. On the inside of the front cover, we have the table of contents listing out all the rules and their associated page numbers. And we have a description of the game, the victory conditions, and then your game components, the cards, the counters, the map. Setting up the game on page 3, start off with the campaign setup, US setup first, and then we have the Japanese setup, and then there's the midway scenario for setup for both the US and the Japanese. Get into bidding, gameplay, gear start, move, stacking, attack. The attack matrix here, same as we saw on the player aid card and on the map, it's here in the rules as well, getting explained to you. Then you have the additional attack limitations, and then an illustrated example of an attack on page 7. Anti-aircraft fire along with 3 text examples, retreat after combat, retreat before naval combat, amphibious attacks, and then an illustrated example of an amphibious attack on page 9. Placing units, repair of fleets, supply, guerrillas, the use of discard cards. Dare you to say that 3 times fast. It's like a field sobriety test. We also have an illustrated example of supply above that. Then we have the year-end in Australia area capture on page 11. Then we get to the Solitaire Play Aid on page 12, about 3/4 of a page. Shows you how easy it is going to be to use the Solitaire bot. Then we have the designer's notes on page 12 and 13. Then we have the counter manifest for the last couple pages. And then on the back of the rules, we have 2 dedications that Greg has added to the game. And that is a look at everything you get inside of Pacific Tide, the United States versus Japan, 1941 to 1945. This is a game designed by Gregory M. Smith and published by Compass Games. Well, anyone who missed out on the first edition, now you can pick up the second edition. You'll also get the mounted map in this edition, which is a great inclusion in this game. The first one we had the paper map, which is fine on its own. It's fantastic, actually. Just slap some plexi down, you're good to go. But this is a perfect size map, I think, for a mounted map. 17 by 22, nice and small, fits on pretty much everybody's table. And so having a mounted map this size is great. Now you can just throw it down, throw your counters down, start rolling dice, and having a good time. Any errata that was found in the first edition has been corrected and added to the rules here for the second. And like I had mentioned before, I did a quick comparison, eyeballed. I didn't have anything to measure with. I just did an eyeball comparison at table level. And it looks like these counters are slightly thicker than the first editions and slightly thinner than the ones we saw in Imperial Tide. So you're kind of getting an in-between there for those who were not happy with the thinner counters. These will be thicker. Those who like the thinner counters like I do, I also like the thick counters. I like both. But overall, it looked great, and it's going to be a lot of fun to get this back on the table. This is a really fun game, and looking forward to having the mounted map now to enjoy when playing Pacific Tide. Well, I hope that helps you guys out if you've been curious about this one. If you have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.